So I want to talk to you today about why meter matters. We've talked for the last few videos about different types of meter: iambic meter, trochaic meter, anapestic meter, dactylic meter. And I find that one of the things that is pretty rare in the teaching of poetry today, and I've taught poetry at the junior high, high school, undergraduate level in a couple different states, so I have a pretty good picture of how writing is typically taught. And I think one of the things that is most surprising to me is how little attention is paid to teaching form, especially metrical patterns, when we teach poetry. I think that this is odd, and yet it's symptomatic of an approach to art that is kind of complex to explain, but I'll try to sum up what I think the problem is. I think the problem that we have when we teach art and when we learn about art is that we believe that art is primarily something that comes from our feelings or thoughts, and it's not primarily something that is shaped by techniques and traditions. Of course, I think it's wrong to separate out techniques and traditions from our thoughts and our feelings. If I have a strong feeling of love toward another person, it only makes sense that I'll want to make beautiful things for them. This is something that philosophers as far back as Plato and Lao Tzu have recognized. And yet, we live in an age and we live in a culture, and I'm specifically thinking of American culture here, but I bet it also applies to other cultures, where we forget that there's a step in between having powerful emotions or having strongly held beliefs and a created work of art. And that step between them is the creative process, which necessarily involves techniques and traditions. In my last few videos, I've tried to talk about meter and metrics and the careful use of words as an explanation of those techniques and traditions that English poetry has typically employed. And when I say English poetry, I don't mean English poetry of only one tradition. I mean of all traditions that have spoken English. If you write in English, you are writing in a language that for at least the last 700 years has used iambic pentameter and end rhymes as a primary technique of the expression of thought and feeling, of story, of expressions of love, of expressions of anger, of protest against unjust governments. End rhyme and iambic pentameter have been there for at least 700 years, and we can track them back even further than that. But if we at least start with Chaucer to the present day, we can't get away from iambic pentameter and end rhyme as being deeply embedded in the traditions of English poetry. Now, we may say some of those traditions we disagree with, or some of the great poets who wrote in iambic pentameter and with end rhymes we maybe don't like the sect they come from, or we disagree with their religious or political principles. That's fine. We can see all across the map, from monarchists to Republicans, from the most progressive to the most conservative in poetry, from people from underrepresented backgrounds to dominant backgrounds, from black writers to white writers, from marginalized writers to very mainstream writers. All have employed certain techniques and traditions, and often in protest of one another. So I want to talk about and think about form in poetry because it's essential, I believe, and I have good backing for this. I think there's at least 3,000 years of world tradition to back me up on this, that when I have strong thoughts or strong feelings, I should apprentice myself to the techniques and traditions of verbal expression that have come before me, especially those of my own country and my own background, but not just those. And I should look to those to see how to best express in my language the things I want to express as a poet. Thanks for listening. I know this is a little bigger picture, but it's something I really care about.